All right, so we finally got to the movie T Blockers, which is currently streaming on Shudder for anyone who wants to check it out. Now this is being promoted just by the film itself, even in the opening credits, as like a trans queer film,
Yes.
queer horror film.
Yes.
Um, and it is about a trans woman who is like, trying to date in a small town, and also like come out to her parents, and
Yeah,
of
she's a
course
filmmaker
she's a
too.
filmmaker
Yeah.
who's trying to make a film,
Yeah.
and she's having a rough go at it, of course. And there starts to be these like attacks on
Mm-hmm.
the LGBT community, specifically trans people in her town. This is an Australian film,
Mm.
and they start to fight back. Um, it kind of reminds me somewhat, and this is not going to be a good way to start this, but it does remind me somewhat of the Black Christmas remake from 2019, which I absolutely hated. It's like one of my least favorite films I've ever watched. Um, because it has this kind of like this like this goo kind of shit that's like making men violent towards women, which I think is just such a silly storyline, with how it's being presented, especially in the Black Christmas remake. You know, I I actually liked our main characters to begin with. There's this weird like opening with, and this is something that continues to keep happening throughout. We keep cutting back to this like almost Elvira-esque trans woman character who's
Mm.
doing this, talking at the camera all spooky, and it's supposed to be some lost film that she's discovered and is watching. I didn't like any of that. I
Mm.
felt I actually thought that felt very cheap.
Mm.
I actually thought that it kind of hurt the film. I had started this by myself
Mm.
a few months ago,
Yeah.
and that was the first couple minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
And because I thought that was so poor, I actually shut it off because I
Uh,
was like, "Oh God, if this is how the whole movie is going to be, no, thank you." And so like we threw it back on because it's getting some love, which I definitely think it has its audience for sure.
mm.
But it's getting some love. So I wanted to check it out, and so we threw it on. And once we got to our main characters, because we have the trans girl and her friend, and I liked them
Mm-hmm.
together, right? And so I was like, okay, I can vibe with this. But I feel like the story is told so poorly that I constantly was like confused on what was
Mm.
happening, and what the point of things were and where we were going. And I was always so lost on things. It's not a complex film. It's just the film is told in a way that makes you go, wait, why are they doing this? And what's happening now?
Yeah, I think that I mean, I really like the style of the film.
Yeah.
I think that there's some really great just cinematography in general. I like the color palettes used. I like all of that stuff and just the
Mm-hmm.
style in general. And I think that the message, uh, if you're somebody who I don't know. I agree with the message of the film. I guess I'll just say that. But I think that, like we talked about it afterwards, I do think that the story is confusing. And it's possible, like, that it is supposed to be kind of, and
Abstract.
yeah, like an abstract storytelling style, which I can definitely see. But um, I think that there's just a lot of layers to the story that don't fit well and make sense. Like there's a meta quality to it too,
Mm-hmm.
that happens, which like I like when films get meta, so I don't have a problem with that. But I think it just adds confusion. And again, there's these story beats that we don't get the full story of what's happening. We maybe get some like dialogue that explains the like the atmosphere of the town and like what's sort of happening politically, which then like is supposed to tie into the horror both in a like fantastical way and also in like the real life horror, but there's like a missing link between that which makes it confusing because then things happen later on that are just like really, I don't know. I just feel like there's it feels like there's parts missing, I
Yes,
guess.
I agree.
Um and
I agree 100%.
it just, so I just feel like that we needed more time.
The movie's only like 75 minutes
Yeah.
long, and it's like, make it 90, and
Yeah.
you might have had a more successful film.
Yeah, I think that we needed more time to just expand upon things because it's kind of rushed. And yeah, as I said, I think it just sort of feels like there's elements that are missing from it. But I like the characters for sure. I think that there's some like really good character moments and character drama happening for sure. And I think that, you know, especially people that are members of the LGBT community will be, you know, like this is definitely something that like the horror aspect hits close to home because there is a lot of like things that are happening in the real world that obviously are referenced here, like, you know, that are terrible and terrifying. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and and when you sit down to watch a movie like this, you I we had talked about this when the film ended, with how volatile things can become online towards things like this on one
Yeah.
side or the other, right? Like, that's what you deal with when you discuss a film like this, right? Like, you're either going to piss off one side that's like, screw movies like this, trans people can get fucked or whatever. And you're talking about the movie in a positive light, they're going to get mad at you. If you talk about it in a negative light, then people who are, allies, or people who are part of the, part of the community, are going to be like, you just didn't get it. You guys are morons, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't with these types of movies. And so there is a hesitancy to even review a film like this for me personally, especially
Mm.
when I don't like it, when I don't have a lot of like positive things to say. I feel like I'm going to come off like I'm bashing the movie because I'm like, transphobic or something. And it's
Yeah,
like,
but
bro, no, this movie just, it's not well constructed like, when
the
it comes to a
storytelling.
story.
Yeah.
Yeah, when it comes to storytelling, it really isn't. Like, when you're watching it, there does feel like there is missing scenes where you're not understanding why their reactions are like this when only this has happened, and somehow we're, kind of conflating this all to some big event that doesn't really feel like that. The film tries to make it seem like I'm being so vague. I'm
I know.
trying
We're
not
trying
to.
to like
It's so hard to
not
dance
spoil
around
things. Yeah.
spoilers for these types of films, so I end up sounding like I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about when I'm trying to hide things. But there's just scenes where we move from characters doing one thing, and I'm so confused on the reaction of this due to what we saw earlier
Yeah.
with other characters doing other things, and those just don't line up.
I think also because this has like like the implications are much broader than just like the small like group of people that we spend time with, and we don't really get to see like the rest of the community. So it ends up not feeling as like large of an like it's like the problem is supposed to be like impacting everybody in the community and in the town,
Mm,
and I don't feel like we really get to see that like happening, and that's probably like a budgetary issue, I would
yeah,
imagine. So I
probably.
think that it has like a really like big ideas and ambitious ideas, but because of some of those constraints, like that also impacts the story aspect. Like maybe if that, but those are also like maybe added scenes that we're talking about. Like
What's
again,
funny is, it actually kind of reminds me of another movie I think was from this year, or maybe it was last year. But I had similar feelings towards that film, and that's It's a Wonderful Knife,
oh,
where the story
mm,
just feels very confusing, and they have
yeah,
these like moments where you're like, what the fuck? How does that fit in here?
yeah, but you like the
But you're like, the
characters,
characters kind of sold you in the first like 10 or 20 minutes, and
yeah,
you're like, oh, I think I'm actually going to vibe with this.
yeah,
And then the story just takes a turn and doesn't explain itself very well. And you're
yeah.
following these characters, and are kind of just confused by everyone's like motives, and it feels very similar to that movie for me.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So it's
so we're transphobic,
we're not at
and
all. No way. I think queer horror is really important. And I think horror is
absolutely.
like insanely important to the queer community as well. So it's definitely has nothing to do with that. Like I think we both liked aspects of this, but because we were so kind of lost on the story aspect, it brings it down for us pretty significantly. But I think it shows promise in a lot of other ways. So it's not like I do think that there will be people like this is not a recommendation for a lot of people necessarily, but yeah.
If you're looking for an LGBT community film, I would recommend the much better movie Slay on Tubi. Drag queens versus vampires. Awesome film. Definitely worth your time. We also liked that other one from last year, which was really good as well. Another really good queer horror movie with the drag queens hanging out in the
Yeah.
house.
Those are much more
What's the
yeah,
one? What was that called?
I'm totally blanking on the name now.
And the like
Um
military brother comes
Yeah,
to the
but that
house.
those are much more like comedic horror, like queer horror, and this one definitely is trying to actually go for like a serious and it does. It's not funny. I don't find like anything is
Mm,
funny in this, but
yeah,
they're totally different vibes. Like this one would be if you're wanting some kind of like kind of art house style um maybe like personal project feel too
sure.
because it definitely has that, especially with the meta quality. So I think that this probably has some really deep, meaning for the creator and people who worked on it, of course. But
Yeah, it's got
anyway,
some good visual style to it
it
for
does.
sure,
It
and I
does.
did like the leads.
Yeah.
So it's got good qualities to it, and I can definitely see people liking it
Yeah.
if they're vibing with the message and the style. Then I think that this could be like a queer cult film.
Yeah. I definitely think it
I
could be
totally
too.
understand that.
Yeah.
It just didn't work for me.
Yeah.
And part of that is because this message doesn't really hit all that close to home with me, obviously.
Yeah.
So there is a bit of a disconnect, but I always view films through that like storytelling lens,
Mm,
regardless of whatever the agenda is behind the film. I don't really care
yeah.
whether or not the story is being told in a way that I feel is good is all that matters to me. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's that. Uh,
Yeah. Let us know what you think.
yes,
So,
and we'll see you in the comments. All right, bye.
bye.